The number was 432,000. Not a legend, not an approximation. Exactly 432,000 years. That number hit me before the civilization did. It appears in the Sumerian king list, a clay tablet sitting in the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, catalogued under reference and 1923.444, copied from an original estimated to predate 2000 BCE. The list records kings who ruled before a great flood. Their reigns are given in precise numerical units called sars. And when you add them up, they total exactly 432,000 years. A number that appears with no apparent coordination in the Hindu concept of the Kali Yuga, in Babylonian astronomical records, in Norse mythology, where 432,000 warriors are said to march out of Valhalla at the end of days. I spent weeks trying to understand why. Maybe it's coincidence. Maybe ancient cultures independently arrived at the same cosmological constant. Maybe there's a numerical explanation rooted in the precession of Earth's equinoxes, a 25,920-year cycle that, multiplied by a specific factor, produces 432,000 with uncomfortable precision. Or maybe these numbers are echoes, fragments of a shared inheritance, remnants of something much older than we've been taught to look for. Because here's what I kept returning to. The mainstream timeline of human civilization begins at roughly 6,000 years ago. Agriculture, writing, cities, all emerging in a window historians call the Neolithic Revolution. Neat, sequential, manageable. But the anomalies don't fit that window. And the more I looked, the more the anomalies seemed to cluster, not randomly but around a specific threshold. Around the period before written history began. Around the moment when, by extraordinary coincidence, the evidence becomes hardest to find. The official story goes like this. Homo sapiens emerged as an anatomically modern species approximately 300,000 years ago in Africa. For most of that time, we were hunter-gatherers, sophisticated, certainly capable of art and symbolic thought, but nomadic. Then, around 10,000 BCE, something shifted. Climate stabilized after the last ice age. Humans began cultivating plants, domesticating animals. Permanent settlements emerged. Pottery, metallurgy, writing. Within just a few thousand years, the great civilizations Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, appeared in rapid succession, as if civilization had been invented wholesale. This is a compelling story. It has good evidence behind it. The agricultural transition is real and archaeologically documented. The emergence of writing in Mesopotamia around 3200 BCE is one of the most thoroughly studied transitions in human history. Mainstream archaeology isn't wrong about what it has found. The question I keep asking is whether it's wrong about what it hasn't found, or what it stopped looking for. Let's start with the numbers on Göbekli Tepe. The site sits in southeastern Turkey, in the Taurus Mountains, 12 miles from the modern city of Sanliurfa. It was first properly excavated beginning in 1994 by German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt. What he found has never been fully absorbed into the standard narrative of civilization's origins. Göbekli Tepe consists of massive T-shaped limestone pillars arranged in circular enclosures, some weighing up to 20 tons. The pillars are covered in bas-relief carvings, foxes, scorpions, cranes, abstract symbols. Many of the carvings are executed with a level of artistic sophistication that would be remarkable even centuries later. The site dates to approximately 9,600 BCE, possibly earlier. Let me put that in context. That's more than 6,000 years before the first pyramid. More than 5,000 years before Stonehenge. According to the official timeline, the people who built Göbekli Tepe were hunter-gatherers, pre-agricultural humans with no cities, no writing, no centralized organization. Yet they quarried, transported, and precisely erected stones the size of modern automobiles, at elevations that required coordinated effort on a scale we associate with state-level societies. And then they buried it, deliberately, systematically, around 8,000 BCE. The entire complex was filled in with soil and rubble in a controlled process that preserved it beneath the surface for 10,000 years, until Schmidt's team arrived. Why would hunter-gatherers build the most sophisticated ritualistic complex in the known prehistoric world, and then bury it? The timeline isn't subtle. Speaking of things being buried, there's Derinkuyu. Derinkuyu is an underground city carved into the volcanic rock of Cappadocia, also in Turkey. It descends at least 18 stories beneath the surface. It has ventilation shafts, thousands of them, designed to circulate fresh air down to the lowest levels. It has wells, stables, wineries, schools, a church, communal gathering spaces. It could accommodate, by most archaeological estimates, somewhere between 20,000 and 50,000 people. And it's not alone. Archaeologists have identified over 200 underground settlements in Cappadocia. 36 of them are considered cities of significant scale. They are connected by tunnels that in some cases run for miles. The Turkish Ministry of Culture estimates that only about 3 to 5% of the underground city of Derinkuyu has been excavated. The rest sits sealed, unexamined, below a landscape of fairy chimneys and vine terraces that receives 3 million tourists per year. The official explanation for Derinkuyu is that it was built and expanded over centuries as a refuge from invaders, from religious persecution. The most commonly cited construction period is around 800 BCE, with use continuing through the Byzantine era and into the medieval period. Here's what no one fully explains. The deepest levels of Derinkuyu show a different type of construction from the shallower ones. The upper levels show the marks of iron tools, chisels, picks, implements consistent with pre-Roman and Roman-era metalworking. The deepest levels show smooth, curved surfaces that some researchers describe as inconsistent with hand tool carving. Erosion patterns in some of the deeper shafts suggest exposure to water at considerable depth, but the region's groundwater table doesn't reach those elevations. Not now. Not in any period of recorded history, but it might have. During the Younger Dryas, the catastrophic climate reversal that ended approximately 11,700 years ago, global sea levels, groundwater tables, and river systems were radically different. A construction timeline that began before the Younger Dryas would explain the anomalous lower levels. It would explain certain features of the ventilation system that seem over-engineered for short-term refugee use. And it would place the origin of Derinkuyu's foundational structures at a period roughly 10,000 to 12,000 years ago that corresponds with uncomfortable precision to the burial of Göbekli Tepe. Maybe I'm seeing patterns where none exist, but let me keep going. Which brings me to the problem of precision. In 1900, a Greek sponge diver named Elias Stadiatos discovered a shipwreck off the coast of the small island of Antikythera. The wreck was Roman era, probably 1st century BCE. Among the recovered artifacts was a corroded lump of bronze and wood, approximately the size of a large dictionary, that sat in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens for decades without proper analysis. When it was finally X-rayed in 1971 by physicist Derek de Soliprice, working with a team from Yale University, what they found inside challenged everything archaeologists thought they knew about ancient technology. The device contained at least 30 gears, some with as many as 223 teeth, arranged in a differential mechanism of extraordinary sophistication. It was, in Price's own words, nothing less than a computer. The Antikythera mechanism could track the movements of the sun and moon with high accuracy. It could predict eclipses using an 18-year Saros cycle. It tracked the Metonic cycle, the 19-year period after which lunar phases recur on the same calendar dates, and incorporated the 76-year Calippic cycle as a correction. Its gear ratios are precise to fractions of a degree. The device has been dated to between 150 and 100 BCE. The shipwreck that carried it dates to approximately the same period. Here's what matters. When researchers began trying to reverse engineer the mechanism, to build a working replica using only the tools and techniques demonstrably available to artisans of the 1st century BCE, they discovered a problem. The gear teeth are cut to a precision that requires either optical magnification to verify or a standardized measurement system far more refined than anything documented from classical antiquity. The mechanism's designer understood astronomical cycles to a depth not matched in any surviving Greek text from the same period. Where did the knowledge come from? The Greeks themselves credited earlier astronomical traditions, Babylonian, Egyptian, possibly older, with providing the foundational observations their own astronomers refined. Hipparchus, who worked in the 2nd century BCE, is thought to have discovered the precession of the equinoxes. But precession is a 25,920-year cycle. Accurately measuring it requires sustained astronomical observation over centuries at minimum, and some researchers argue over millennia. Precession was known. Before Hipparchus, before Greece, the number 25,920 appears, divided and multiplied, fragmented into ritual and cosmology, in Sumerian texts, in Hindu astronomical literature, in the architectural proportions of structures that predate classical civilization by thousands of years. The part that keeps me up at night is this: you cannot accidentally know precession. You cannot stumble onto it. It requires a program of deliberate, standardized, multi-generational astronomical observation. Someone had to build institutions capable of preserving data across hundreds of human lifetimes. Someone had to care about the sky with the kind of systematic attention we associate with science. Not myth, not religion, but rigorous, repeatable measurement. Let's talk about what gets lost in fires. The Library of Alexandria is the most famous example. That torching is so embedded in our cultural imagination that people sometimes forget it was not a single event, not a single fire, but a process. The library suffered multiple catastrophic damage events. Julius Caesar's accidental fire in 48 BCE, which may have destroyed a warehouse of books rather than the library itself. The Edict of Theophilus in 391 CE, which destroyed the Serapeum and whatever remained there. And the Arab conquest of 642 CE, after which the remaining holdings are believed to have been dispersed or destroyed. But Alexandria was not alone. The Library of Carthage, containing, by ancient accounts, 500,000 volumes, was destroyed by Rome in 146 BCE during the Third Punic War. Carthage itself was burned, its surviving population enslaved, its very earth reportedly salted. Whatever Carthaginian scholarship had accumulated, astronomical records, engineering treatises, navigational charts, vanished. The Royal Library of Ashurbanipal in Nineveh, which housed some 30,000 clay tablets and was regarded in its time as one of the greatest repositories of knowledge in the ancient world, was destroyed when the Medes and Babylonians sacked Nineveh in 612 BCE. Some of those tablets survive, excavated by Austin Henry Layard in the 19th century, now held in the British Museum, but the organization of the collection, the interpretive texts, the catalog itself is gone. The pattern that emerges from these destructions isn't a natural disaster. It isn't the slow degradation of time. Every major destruction of ancient knowledge involved deliberate state violence. Armies, specific orders to burn, to scatter, to prohibit. The Library of Alexandria wasn't simply neglected until it crumbled. It was. In 213 BCE, the Chinese Emperor Qin Shi Huang ordered what has become known in Chinese historiography as the burning of books and burying of scholars. The Shiji, the records of the Grand Historian, compiled by Sima Qian in the 1st century BCE, records that all books not relating to state-approved subjects were to be destroyed. Agriculture, medicine, divination, and legalist political philosophy were exempted. History, philosophy, poetry, science, particularly anything predating the Qin dynasty, were not. Scholars who defied the order and concealed prohibited books were executed. Hundreds of Confucian scholars were reportedly buried alive. What's significant here isn't just the destruction. It's the specificity of the exemptions. The emperor kept what was useful for controlling the present. He destroyed what preserved memory of the past. The records most aggressively targeted were historical ones. Documents that might have established competing legitimacy, or revealed that China's institutional knowledge predated the dynasty that now claimed authority over it. Speaking of institutional knowledge and the deliberate destruction of competing legitimacy, there's what happened to the Maya. In 1562, in the Yucatan Peninsula, the Spanish friar Diego de Landa presided over an event known as the Auto de Fe of Mani. In the courtyard of the town of Mani, Maya codices, folding books made of fig bark paper, containing astronomical observations, ritual calendars, historical records, agricultural cycles, were gathered and burned. De Landa would later write that there were a great number of these books, and that, as they contained nothing in which there was not to be seen superstition and lies of the devil, we burned them all. Of the thousands of Maya codices believed to have existed at the time of Spanish contact, survive. The Dresden Codex, now held in Germany, the Madrid Codex in Spain, the Paris Codex also in France, the Grolier Codex, whose authenticity was disputed for decades before being accepted, now in Mexico. The Dresden Codex contains, among other things, an astronomical table tracking the synodic cycle of Venus to within 2 minutes per year of accuracy. The Venus calendar inscribed in the Dresden Codex accounts for a long-term drift correction, a mathematical adjustment applied over what appears to be centuries of accumulated observation data. That level of precision, applied to a planet visible to the naked eye, with no instruments beyond careful, consistent recording across generations of trained observers, represents an investment in systematic knowledge that we have almost no ability to reconstruct. Not because it was impossible, because the books that recorded it were burned in a courtyard in the Yucatan in 1562. The timing is almost theatrical. There's a word that appears in ancient texts from cultures that had, by every orthodox account, no contact with one another. The word varies: Vimana in Sanskrit, Ben in Egyptian, the chariot of fire in Ezekiel's vision recorded in Hebrew, but the structural description is strikingly consistent. A flying craft, metallic or described with metallic properties, capable of generating heat or light, operating at altitude, associated with beings of elevated status or divine authority. I want to be careful here. Ancient descriptions of unusual aerial phenomena have generated more speculative literature than almost any other category of historical mystery, and most of it is credulous to the point of absurdity. I'm not interested in credulous. What I'm interested in is this: the Vimana texts, particularly the Vaimanika Shastra, contain specific technical descriptions of craft construction. Materials, fuel systems, propulsion concepts. Some of these descriptions are vague to the point of uselessness. They describe materials like Rajaloha, a royal metal whose composition is unknown, or combustion processes that reference substances with no clear modern equivalent. Others are more specific enough that, in 1974, aeronautical engineers at the Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore published a peer-reviewed analysis of 40 aircraft designs described in the Vaimanika Shastra. Their conclusion was that the designs as described would not fly. The proportions were wrong. The physics didn't work. But here's what no one seems to ask. If the Vaimanika Shastra is a complete fabrication, a text with no foundation in any actual technology, why does it contain specific, internally consistent descriptions of materials and systems that a medieval forger would have had no reason to invent? Why does it reference the problem of heat management at altitude? Why does it describe pilot physiological stress in ways that have no mythological parallel but significant overlap with early aviation medicine? Maybe the text is a garbled, degraded transmission of technical knowledge that once existed and no longer does. Maybe it's evidence of a technol. But once you ask the question, once you begin assembling the catalog of anomalies, the precision artifacts, the destroyed libraries, the astronomical knowledge that shouldn't exist when it does, you begin to notice something that no individual anomaly can account for on its own. The anomalies don't scatter randomly across time. They cluster. They cluster at the boundary. They cluster at the transition between what we call prehistory and what we call history, at the Younger Dryas boundary, at the period of approximately 10,000 to 12,000 years ago when something, a cosmic impact event, some researchers now argue, based on platinum group element concentrations in ice cores from Greenland and sediment layers from 50 sites across 4 continents, may have fundamentally disrupted human civilization. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, first published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in 2007 by a team led by Richard Firestone of the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, proposed that a fragmented comet or asteroid struck or exploded above the North American ice sheet approximately 12,900 years ago, triggering a catastrophic cooling period, megafaunal extinctions, and the collapse of the Clovis culture. The paper generated enormous controversy. It also generated a body of follow-up research that has, as of the most recent published studies, found supporting evidence at over 50 archaeological and sedimentary sites across multiple continents. If a civilization of significant sophistication existed before 12,900 years ago, and the anomalies suggest, at minimum, that we should not rule this out, then the Younger Dryas event was its extinction. A near-total reset. A few thousand survivors in scattered pockets, carrying fragments of knowledge too complex to rebuild, too important to forget, too arcane for their descendants to fully interpret, which would mean that what we call ancient wisdom The astronomical precision, the architectural knowledge, the numerical systems that appear too sophisticated for their supposed origin, isn't ancient at all. It's the debris of something much older, something that lost its context when its civilization burned. I don't have answers, only patterns. And I want to be precise about what the patterns do and don't show. They don't show a technologically advanced civilization with flying machines and power plants. The evidence doesn't support that narrative, and I won't pretend it does. What they show is more interesting and more disturbing than science fiction. They show a systematic underestimation of human cognitive and organizational capacity in the deep past, combined with an equally systematic destruction of the records that might correct that underestimation. The clay tablets from Nippur, some still unanalyzed, sitting in storage at the University of Pennsylvania Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology, contain mathematical tables whose purpose is not fully understood. The underwater structures at Yonaguni, off the coast of Japan, remain formally unclassified, neither definitively natural nor definitively artificial, after 30 years of intermittent investigation. The Samépata rock in Bolivia, a sandstone outcrop covered in channels, basins, and geometric carvings whose function and age remain disputed, has never been the subject of a full systematic excavation. The Antikythera mechanism spent 70 years in a museum before anyone x-rayed it. Göbekli Tepe was ignored, dismissed as a medieval cemetery, for decades after its initial discovery, precisely because its implications were too disruptive to accommodate. I spent weeks trying to understand the number 432,000. I still don't understand it, but I understand something about what we do when we encounter things we don't understand. We catalog them as anomalies, isolate them from each other, and wait for more evidence. We don't look for the pattern. The archive still exists, dispersed across museums and university basements and sealed archaeological sites and the sediment layers of lake beds and ocean floors. A significant fraction of what we know about the ancient world was discovered in the last 50 years. A significant fraction of what remains to be found hasn't been looked for yet. And once you see the shape of what's missing, once you trace the outline of the destroyed libraries, the buried temples, the precision artifacts without precedent, the numbers that keep appearing in cultures that shouldn't share a mathematics, you cannot look at the official timeline of human civilization the same way again. The pattern doesn't tell me what was lost. It tells me something was. And whatever it was, someone went to extraordinary lengths to make sure we'd never find it.